Hi, everybody. Tom here. I'm going to record this lecture for you on the concept of artists who use color as their subject, an idea of kind of the colors being a standalone, pure idea. I'm going to go through this as quick as I can. First, I want to start with Kazimir Malevich, who's a Russian artist whose work came out of the kind of Russian Revolution. The whole social order had been turned over, and he wanted art to do the same thing. So he kind of started conceiving of this idea of abstraction with color being the standalone subject. Next would be Pierre Mondrian, who was kind of influenced by kind of an idea of a revolution in spirituality, actually, as well as the kind of formal quality of abstraction being a simplified version of the universe and the world. Mark Rothko, an American painter who developed these large paintings that are kind of immersive, where this large scale paintings where you feel like you almost fall into the color of the paintings. Barnett Newman around the same time, using that primary triad that we studied before as a harmony for this painting called Who's Afraid of Red, Yellow, and Blue 2. Joseph Albers, our old friend here, again, this kind of sense of using these a reductive format so that the color itself comes forward as a standalone subject, just manipulating the colors to kind of have energy, recede, come forward in this format. Here's some of notes he did on his paintings. He never actually mixed any of the colors in his paintings. He just had this huge library of oil paint tubes that he collected from all over the place and just only used paint straight out of the tube. Here's the back of one of his paintings showing the notation he did to kind of describe to him what paint was used in the painting. Yves Klein was a French artist who kind of made this amazing blue paintings where he actually patented a color as Yves Klein blue. There's an example of what it might feel like, but I wanted to show you with a person in front of it before, just to give you a sense of the physical quality of it. These things are incredibly flat surface, and you feel like you're kind of falling into this infinite blue. Robert Ryman, who's an artist who confined his whole life to painting with only white paint the whole time, might sound a little ridiculous, but think of it this way. If you reduce your options, sometimes you find a lot of subtlety within what's left, I would say. Ellsworth Kelly, I'm showing you some of these paintings that kind of take on this idea of randomness of color, kind of a color chart idea. Here's another one by Gerhard Richter. We would have seen this if we had made it to the Met this season. This is kind of the idea of the kind of commercial use of color as a color chart, the randomization of it. Here's a kind of a more updated version of it by Damien Hirst, this kind of idea of an infinite painting that you can make out of the randomized color of it. It has a certain sense of a kind of a system to it, but the choices of the colors seem to be kind of taken away from the creative person somehow. Frank Stella is an important artist who kind of really pushed forward this idea of color as a material quality, the very material of paint and the color within that as being the subject of the painting, in a sense. He has this quote, "I wanted to get the paint out of the can and onto the canvas." This idea that, if you could only keep the paint as good as it is in the can, that kind of amazing, almost innocent quality that a beautiful color has when you open a can of paint, to try and have it act like that before it's trying to be art so much. Here's a larger painting of his from a little bit later, also maybe using that kind of randomized color idea. This is some stills from a video, actually a film that Richard Serra, you might know him as this large-scale metal sculptor, but here is this kind of series where he used a stack of color aid and kept having this hand sweep in and pull off the top sheet so that you get this next color underneath. So there's this kind of like meditative almost kind of quality of the field of color changing, and then this kind of dirty fingernail hand coming in every now and then to sweep off the sheet. The color field painters were a bunch of artists who kind of started working in the late 50s, early 60s. Really the person who was kind of credited with starting the whole genre is Helen Frankenthaler, who made these paintings on the floor by thinning her paint down. So you get these kind of stained, huge paintings that the critic Clement Greenberg, who was one of her advocates, kind of described as being very important. This idea that the color is embedded into the support, somehow that was seen as very a big innovation somehow. Here's some others. You get this kind of idea that the color image is kind of created out of the very material itself. The kind of the act of it, the pouring of it, taking off from someone like Jackson Pollock becomes part of the whole image that's related through the color. Joe Zodlisky using sprays and airbrushes to kind of create these diaphanous fields of color. Blinky Palermo was a German artist who, that's not his real name, that's his fake art name, kind of created these paintings taking a riff off of the kind of large-scale minimalist painting that was being done. Here he's just sewing commercial fabrics together. It's maybe on one half a little bit of a joke about that kind of painting, but also they're very beautiful actually, if you can give yourself to them. Some light artists who were kind of using then taking the step next to kind of actually using light and color as its actual subject. Dan Flavin, this idea of freeing the color from a specific surface of a painting, dissolving it into the world that we are actually in, into the space that we are in, making it less about the art object and more about the experience. Although now these things are worth millions of dollars, of course, the objects themselves. James Turrell is a tremendous artist who, if you get up to Mass MoCA to see he has this 25-year retrospective that we're only a few years into. There's these immersive color spaces that you walk into, and slowly the color changes. Your whole body kind of tends to dissolve when you're in these things, and you just become a pair of floating eyeballs. It's very incredible to experience this. If museums ever open again, this is a little closer. This is at PS1 in Queens. This is a piece of his where he cut a hole in the roof and then had these lights that slowly come up into the space around it as the dusk proceeds and as the deep sky of the blue sky kind of deepens. You have this kind of lights coming up around it and creating this incredible balance of those two qualities of temperature. Robert Irwin, a California light and space painter as they were known, kind of this very reductive experiential color. Here's another piece of his playing on that title from the Barnett Newman. John McCracken is a California artist who's using color within the kind of context of things like surfboard making, very California, car hot rods and stuff like that. This kind of finish fetish quality to these minimal objects. Larry Bell using these kind of colored glass cubes that you see through into each other, and the density of the color increases the more cubes you look as they're stacked into each other. John Baldessari made this piece where he's kind of continually painting a room one color, and as soon as he finishes another color, he's painting it again. This is a video that is kind of this Sisyphean, rather funny task that he's performing. Jim Lambie, an artist who's kind of using tape to kind of colored tape to kind of make this composition using the architecture of the room to set the parameters of it. So one thing up to this point, all these artists I've shown you so far have pretty much been almost exclusively white and male. And I've been thinking a lot about the fact that this idea of purity in color, is it connected to some sort of sense of, in art, of rather white privilege actually? I'm kind of curious what you think about that take. I'm not sure I believe it, but I'm thinking about it. And so I want to show you a couple artists that are artists of color who are kind of using some of those same mechanisms. Stanley Whitney is an African-American artist who, for many years, had a very hard time getting attention to his very beautiful paintings because the art public did not really respond to an African-American artist who didn't seem to be explicitly speaking about the African-American experience through narrative, let's say. This has changed now, I think, and he's having a very good career and getting noticed for these paintings, but it was kind of a bit of a problem for him for many years. Alma Thomas, an African-American artist who started painting very late in life, influenced by minimalism. Ed Clark, a painter who makes these African-American artist who makes these amazing paintings using a broom to sweep the pigment right across the surface of the canvases. Howardina Pindell, she's still active and working, African American artist, making these kind of delicate fields of color, these immersive fields. Donald Odili Odita is a younger African American artist who's kind of having these works coated with a particularly Afrocentric idea of color. I don't really know the specifics of it, but maybe it might be enough to know that there's this kind of this system underlying that as you see these. Bridget Riley, a British artist who's kind of part of the op art scene, and Carmen Herrera, who's now 103 years old, still painting, um, making these very dramatic, simple, minimalist paintings for many years now, and only just getting the attention now. Anish Kapoor, a Indo-British artist who kind of uses his Indian heritage, Indian Asian heritage, kind of this experience of kind of intense color in India into these technologically kind of amazing space things that are kind of on the wall but protrude into the wall. Katerina Grossa is a British artist, a German artist who's kind of spray painting color, almost like color like escaping from a painting onto the world. Here's a piece she did a few years ago at Fort Tilden in Brooklyn that you could go out to and kind of walk through this kind of colored house where the paint just kind of leapt free of its structure. And then last, I just want to show you a very interesting app. If you have an iPad, you can use this. It doesn't work on a phone or a computer, but if you have an iPad, you can look into downloading this. It's a interaction of color app developed. Joseph Albers didn't develop it, but Yale developed it out of his archive, and you can do some of the experiments we've been doing with ColorAid on the app. Thank you very much.